All right, good morning, boys and girls. Happy Monday. Today we are covering chapters 7 and 8 on Unit 11, the Civil War. A couple reminders for today. Make sure to complete any active assessments on Edulastic. Make sure that you're doing iReady, math, and reading. We are looking for students who are completing 45 minutes of math and 45 minutes of reading a week. That breaks down to be about 10 minutes per subject a day. You should be able to meet that target. Complete your math and ELA assignments and make sure you're watching the videos. And don't forget that we are monitoring through GoGuardian throughout the week. Please make sure you are using your Chromebook as you would at school. Our agenda today is I'm going to state the objectives of what we're expected to learn. I am going to go over the big question. I will read chapter 7 to you. You will read chapter 8 on your own. And then we will also go over independent work, some more reminders, and goodbye. Our objectives today. So today we're going to learn about the influences that shaped Abraham Lincoln as a young man. And we're also going to talk about a crisis in the South that's getting deeper. So our objectives today is I can summarize the important events in Abraham Lincoln's early life, chapter 7, and I can explain how the Dred Scott decision, John Brown's raid, and the election of 1860 increased the disagreements between the North and the South. So our big question today, and something to listen out for as we read, is what shaped Abraham Lincoln as a young man? Chapter 7, Young Mr. Lincoln. Lincoln on slavery. Many Northerners opposed to the spread of slavery were attracted to a new political party called the Republican Party. One of the party's leaders was a lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln. For Lincoln, as for the great number of Americans in the North and the West, the question of whether slavery was right or wrong was quite simple. It was just a matter of putting yourself in the other fellow's shoe. As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master, he said. This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this is no democracy. Lincoln once said in a private conversation, "Whenever I hear of anyone arguing in favor of slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally." Although he hated slavery, Lincoln was not an abolitionist. Abolitionists, people such as William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, and members of the Underground Railroad, wanted to abolish slavery immediately and everywhere, not just in the territories of the United States, but in the southern states too. They did not care whether the actions against slavery were constitutional. Constitutional means allowed or legal under the terms of our Constitution. Lincoln knew that under the U.S. Constitution, the federal government did not have a right to interfere with slavery in the states. The government could, however, stop slavery from entering the territories. If it did that, Lincoln hoped that slavery would gradually die out everywhere in the country. Lincoln cared about the ending of slavery, but wanted to do so constitutionally. So who was Abraham Lincoln? Like so many Americans in the West, Abraham Lincoln started out in life without any special advantages. He was born in a one-room log cabin in Kentucky. His mother could neither read nor write, and his father could barely write his own name. Abraham's father, Thomas Lincoln, had the unfortunate knack of picking out one piece of bad farmland after another. After struggling to make a living in Kentucky, Thomas moved his family to Indiana, where he again chose land unwisely. Abraham was 7 at the time. Like children everywhere on the frontier, he and his sister helped with farm chores. They went to school only when they could be spared from work at home. Altogether, Abraham probably spent less than 1 year in the schools of Kentucky and Indiana. He did not miss a great deal, for frontier schools were quite poor. Children of all ages were taught at the same time in the same one-room building. With no books, the children learned by repeating after the teacher. Everyone at the same time said their different lessons aloud. It's little wonder that these schools were called blab schools. When Abraham was 9 years old, tragedy struck the Lincoln home. Abraham's mother died, leaving Thomas to care for his 2 children alone. A year later, Thomas married again. Abraham's stepmother was a loving person. She taught Abraham to read, and with her encouragement, he developed a strong desire to learn. The family had only a few books, but Abraham read them over and over. He was willing to travel many miles to borrow books from others. In addition, Abraham took care of all the writing for the Lincoln family. Soon he was doing the same for many neighbors as well. Unfortunately, life on the frontier meant there was little time for reading. Always tall and strong for his age, Abraham did more than his share of clearing and plowing the land. His father also hired him out to work for neighbors. As a teenager, Abraham began to take on jobs away from the home. He worked on a ferry boat, he built a flatboat, and floated goods down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. He hired himself a cousin out to split logs into the rails for fencing, and one spring, the 2 of them split 5,000 logs, a huge amount of work. This earned Abraham the nickname of the rail splitter. But through these years, Abraham seemed to have no particular goals in life. He later described himself at this time as a piece of floating driftwood. Floating driftwood described the Lincoln family as well. Thomas Lincoln moved the family again when Abraham was 19, this time to Illinois. Abraham helped with the usual frontier jobs, building a log cabin, clearing and fencing the land, planting crops. A couple of years later, though, when Lincoln moved yet again, Abraham did not go with them. At 21, he was ready to strike out on his own. He went to live in the small town of New Salem, Illinois. Lincoln on his own. Being the first newcomer in a small town was uncomfortable at first. Soon after Abraham arrived, the young men in the town challenged him to a wrestling match against their leader, a strong man named Jack Armstrong. Lincoln, 6 feet 4 inches, tall and rugged, defeated Armstrong. Immediately after, the 2 young men became best friends, and Lincoln was quickly accepted by all the other young men. Lincoln did more than wrestle, however. Anxious to improve himself, he joined New Salem's debating club, read more books, and studied grammar and mathematics all on his own. After working for a time in the store, Abraham and his partner opened a general store of their own in New Salem. The store did poorly, and when it did close after a year, the 2 partners owed large debts. When the partner died, Lincoln insisted on paying off all the money himself. It took years, but he paid back every last penny. After that, Lincoln became known as Honest Abe. Later, Lincoln studied law and became a lawyer. He moved to nearby Springfield, the capital of Illinois. Soon, he and a young partner were among the most successful lawyers in town. But few would have guessed that from the look of their office. The windows were never washed, papers were scattered everywhere and piled high on the desks and tables. On one large envelope, Lincoln wrote, "When you can't find it anywhere else, look into this." He often stuffed letters into his tall silk hat. Once, when he bought a new hat, he absentmindedly threw out the old one, notes and all. Lincoln was liked and trusted by his neighbors. They elected him to serve 4 terms in the Illinois State Legislature. Later, he also served 1 term in the U.S. Congress during the Mexican-American War. After that, Lincoln decided to leave government and go back to his law practice. But one thing was for sure, he was firmly against slavery. And as the slavery issue grew to dominate all other issues in American life, Lincoln knew that he could not remain on the sidelines. He decided he must take an active part in an effort to rid the nation of slavery. All right, so now that we've read all about Abraham Lincoln, Now it's your turn to read Chapter 8 about how the crisis is deepening between North and South. I really enjoy that chapter about Abraham Lincoln because throughout I feel like he really embodied our go routine value of mission. He never stopped learning, he never stopped growing, and he worked really hard to become president. So I thought that was a really good example of our go routine value. Again, you're going to read Chapter 8, and as you read Chapter 8, I want you to look for what led the South to succeed and to kind of slowly separate itself from the North. Once you're done for the day, you are going to have a map activity, and you're going to answer these questions about the map. So it's kind of talking about the different types of battles and where they were fought. We haven't read Chapter 10 quite yet, but you can still use this to kind of preview it before we learn about it. So that way you have a good visual aid for when we do learn about it. All right, boys and girls, here are some reminders and goodbyes before we leave today. Don't forget to complete any active assessments on Edulastic. Don't forget iReady Math and Reading. Complete math and ELA videos as directed in your packet. And also don't forget that we are monitoring Go Guardian throughout the week. Make sure you're using your Chromebook as you would at school. All right, scholars, I hope you have a great day.